These are poems I wrote when I was young, 1972 to 75. And at that time I was deeply searching for a direction. I didn't know what to do. And I came upon a essay called Personism, and I said, this is the way to go. But Personism, you may not know, by Frank O'Hara. He describes a new way of writing poetry. He says, quoting him, "On a day in which I was in love with someone, I went back to work and I wrote a poem for the person. But while I was writing it, I was realizing that I could have just, if I wanted to, I could have just called him on the phone." Now that may seem, why is that important to me? Because I said, why don't I just write poems for people and give them the poems, and I don't have to worry about a bigger audience. And I don't have to worry. O'Hara also says, well, I could have just made the call, but I decided, since I was enamored of Shakespeare, I wrote kind of in more Elizabethan form so they wouldn't be confused with phone calls. So years later I decided I'd publish them, but then I realized, well, nobody knows who these people are. I've just wrote them for certain people, but this is a book that was written for Lady, a lot of the poems are dedicated to Lady Bunny. And I said, well, if people don't know who it is, let me just, in a preface, describe them. So my first poem is for her, but let me describe a little bit about her. There's a famous New York City-based Lady Bunny, a drag performer. This is an artist from Chicago who I met, introduced by Jerome Sala. Her name came from her association with Lord Buckley, a comedian who was famous at the time for doing monologues like the Naz. Well, what was attractive to me of Bunny was her lore. She told the events of artists' lives with somehow matter of fact, but made them legendary. Furthermore, she was like an outlaw. And I mean, not figuratively. She'd been in jail, she'd had a lot of friends who were drug dealers, and these two elements, art and crime, were attractive. So anyway, but she also had a theory of painting. She was a painter, which was that there's a certain level below everything where you can reach the true artistic essence. So here's a poem I wrote of sonnet for the painter Lady Bunny. "There's a beauty deeper than the body," Lady Bunny tells me, "and it's deeper than the soul." She says, "I can't lie on this point." Charles Olson would say, "Achieve the proper disposition of the elements, and all recedes to its proper depth." Here's a composition of hers. "The room draws near the red beads of rain on the window. The sun settles like a rose covered with snow. Now the stars that fascinate the blue petals cannot see you without blinking. Nor you them, Bunny, nor you them. Eyes taut with dew, tired with looking. Let's search until it's true." Meanwhile, I'm working at a hospital, nursing home for disabled adults. I was there for 3 years. I got to know my crew members, and they were Judy, Bertha, and Marianne Esther, and I wrote them poems. Let me say something about how they, just as Bunny introduced me to the world of art, they introduced me to the world of religion. I read a little about them. Bertha was a Jehovah's Witness. I attended the Kingdom Call with her. Judy went to the Baptist church, and I went there and heard the choir. Marianne was a black Muslim, so I didn't go to that temple, mosque, but she talked a lot about growing up in very poor circumstances. So I wrote them poems, but the poems are about what happened at the nursing home. So here, to give you the background, this poem, I'm shaving. In the morning, we had to shave the residents. Some of them couldn't use their hands so well, so I'm shaving somebody with Bertha, and she thinks back to her boyfriend, who's mentioned earlier, Walker. So you got the picture of what's going on. Razor's voice rising like a shell's chorus above the surf of 3 or 4 faucets, where Jim has his arm beneath the man's chin, hand across his back to hold him at rest. His seizures controlled. He's only fighting this Nick Burson shifting and gathering weight. So Bertha pulls the shaver off its plug and the sound drops like the chord. And she sees, pressed to Nick's knee, Jim's hip thrown forward to arrest his fall. And the line of Jim's leg could have been Walker, she's thinking, setting for a fight or caressed. She told me, talking up to him on my elbow, I confess, he has some pretty teeth, my boy's father. And Jim, sight half hidden and holding Nick's head in a hug, sees along Bertha's brown shoulder a single strap slice against the curve of her collarbone, like a rib of sand glowing under the ice. Now, that's Bertha. Judy, now a scene. Our residents used to go to like these workshops for the disabled, but on the weekends they'd all go to eat lunch at the huge cafeteria, and there were a lot of them lined up, and we never had enough people. So here's Bertha serving lunch. On the steam table, a basin laid among the bowls of greasy ground beef patties. In front were 3 dishes, the light red, yellow, pasted curls, the spoons tending to, and the line went raggedly back from there, 140 patients, waiting, with one woman to help the server. A red touch to her afro, like a ripple of light in the east. She would watch their hands and free shoulders bump and overlap like birds in flight. And skewering the bread, a resident slips and the soup spills on the onions, carried like a flood. Spoons swamped by mustard. Judy thinks of the red dribble of ketchup that hues her hand like a sprig of blood. And on the collar of his sleeve, and he's all the time hollering. Okay, holler. Lastly, so Marianne, like she didn't go to her mosque, but she talked about growing up very poor. So here we are. The poem is called Howard Jackson Park, which is the subway I used to ride home in the subway. I had kind of a crush on her, and this describes riding on the subway and my thoughts. She slept beside me, slumped forward, her knees against the seat. Her wig drowsily keeled. One brown curl tumbled undone, a feeling related to evil. Some darker genius sees perhaps a neutral ground, but I'm more particular. I'm brought near the equating of beauty and sadness. Something poor and hustled, torn and tricked, pimped and mated. Marianne, your hand laying across your thigh is like the color of tar sugar on the door. Silly, mute sadness in Chicago's half-sun. Sky reflecting the lake, the beginning of a downpour. I'd like to kiss you, take your hand again, meet your husband, but I don't know where to begin. Now, so here's just a poem. Let me just describe how working by myself in the disabled adults place. I'm helping a guy take a shower who wants to wash his hair, but he has trouble doing that. But I put it in very lyrical terms for some reason. Jet of water jewels occluding and diluting the color of his skin. The pigments for me impinged by the smattering of salt soothed from my sweat, the tinge of droplets mopping the lids of my glasses. Wet down nipples dripping, spanieled, slipping like tongues of lighted angels to lick him clean. Carried down the dirt, dust picked up by speckled streams, water fuddled at the furrows of his chest. July 8th. The author is to give William Luder, a man of about 35 with cerebral palsy, but a great desire and patience in taking care of himself, to give him a shower of tepid water in the 90 degrees. He puts the coconut oil shampoo on his head, which William really digs, and he rubs it in, which he would like to do himself, but as he cannot stand without one hand bracing himself, and as he needs two to massage his scalp, I take him by the hips to hold him up. And smiling, he makes the lather rise with vigor. And the pleasure that he finds in washing his hair, I almost sort of feel. And then he slips, nearly falls, and I catch him around the waist, stepping in the rain and water soak my clothes, and the laugh he gives at my shameful condition is equal fitted by my smile. Okay. So, lastly, I was writing person poems to people. I said, why don't I write them to the poets that I adore and love? And there's one poet, if I could say this modestly, that I've loved my whole life, which is Hart Crane. If you don't know Hart Crane, he wrote a poem, The Bridge. He said this is a riposte to the wasteland, which he admired, but he said the wasteland is all like a boo-hoo and how bad civilization is now that mass democracy or mass culture is ruining and degrading us. So I'm going to write The Bridge, which is like a futurist kind of poem in which the Brooklyn Bridge is a symbol of the fact that the working man and the working woman fighting together can build great, and with technology can build these great monuments of beauty. So I consider the bridge equal to wasteland, but it comes out, the bridge comes out, nobody reads it. Crane is depressed. He's gay in a time when he had to hide that, and he got beat up quite a few times when it turned out that people found out he was gay and didn't like it, and he drank heavily. So he got I think Guggenheim to go to Mexico, but he didn't do well there, and he comes back from Mexico on a ship, the Rizaba, and jumps over or falls overboard. So here's a poem. I wrote an elegy for him with a couple of allusions. One is, if you don't know this, there's Little Pip as a character in Moby Dick who falls overboard on a whaleboat. They pick him up, but he's gone crazy floating in the water. Two, Jacob's Ladder is in the Bible. There's the angels are going up and down, so that's mentioned. And lastly, Dante has a bridge in the Inferno which collapsed. So all this is mentioned. But, and so maybe you don't need to know that, maybe you do. So here is my poem, elegy for Hart Crane. Alone in the audience, like Hart Crane, fallen far alee, soothed in the blood of the ocean, choked in the spokes of the hurtling sea, dumped in the swamp that swelled and dispelled, spilled and splashed, cupped and uncapped, across the marine and blue-sought headlands. The sun wrenching itself inch by blazing inch toward the zenith, almost reached. His coat lying in the stern of the boat, cringing wet with the sweat of the sea. Orizaba, driving toward the North Atlantic. Do not look back. Let your engines not shiver in some inmost sob, half heard. Do not founder between troughs of legless waves, or point your bloody prow toward the sparkling coast, a dark tender with mirrors. April 27. Crossing and recrossing, turning and turning back. The heavy ship tracing a winding line 300 miles from Havana. Dipped and pivoted through the anonymous waves. Isle over isle, twisting through the books of foam that lay purple with the purples of the sun. Back and back again, the waves like ranks of angels, cherubims and thrones. Jacob's ladder snapped and boiling in the sea. The endless wells of water, the ship a steam-wreathed stage where passengers were pressed into seaman's service. Down crests, down acres of throbbing fields, and binoculars on box meant for use in the New York Opera House. The ship, as if it too were lost, looming across meadows, its engines fragmented, pounding, its screws, the sound dissolving like a slender reed in the vast underpinning, and sighing, the quelled longing of thunder, gurgling and sighing onto itself, alone and aimless in the crystal hangings, where another Ishmael marked and remarked the melting bloodlines. Heart, you have splashed out from a pool closed in cool white marble. Heart, a fragrant droplet curving down the spine of a mirror. Heart, a spider swinging through the greater space, broken away and descended down gravitation's vortex. Break off, descend. Heart, thy hand, I claim it, and thy arms. Did you bob there, like little Pip, riding himself in the long wake of the whaleboat, trying to wipe the sparks of water from his lashes with hands that drew a length of lace when lifted? Did you shake your head like a puppy, like him feel the water knotted in your ears? Did a ringlet of hair prick your eye to be brushed aside by fingers noosed? Shoes like his, an iron cuff on the feet, the shirt flapping sleepily like the rags of a sail on the absolute Dutchman. Riding dune on dune as Pip's boat sailed past, leaving him to squander his sanity, gazing at the drifting pulse of the South Pacific. Did you bob like a cotton ball when the steamer slowed and turned, watching a play whose actions you felt wouldn't intrude? Hang in heavy clutch of midwife tide to make out the smudge of faces on the rail, the ticking of voices like the snip of a newsreel off-center above your head. Mortal, silent, your passage banked and cast before you, the Caribbean breasted and drank. Or did you dive down, fleeing the curlicues of breath through the greater breath and the pale blue to the deeper blue? Your bridge, and Dante's fell. His span spooked by holy procession, yours cracked by too narrow obsession. Tunnel or river wouldn't tie together our country, dearie, nor they faggot tongue unverse the past, lest it enter the surface that is smashed. You had a head too full of thought, not profit aimed as one ought, to find a myth, not of open spaces, but of golden smokestacks, belting out our wages. Heart, 40 years between us now, between your dip and my dipping pen, between your 2 pages, closing your poetry and opening mine. Heart, alone in the audience, I, and my coat laid over a chair reserved for you. So, a lot of these poems, like the Crane poem, all this, Bunny inspired him and she encouraged me to do this and that, but one time she goes, your poems are getting longer and longer, can't you write something short, like a song with a melody? I said, okay, so here's my short, you want to hear my short poem, folks? Here it is. It's like a psalm. If you'll be lovely, I will be too. If you'll be lovely, that's what we'll do. I don't want nothing that you ain't got. I don't want nothing that costs a lot. Give me some lovin', I'll give you mine. Give me some lovin', then we'll be fine. If you'll be lovely. That's it.